At exactly 8 o'clock, the heavy oak doors of the Sterling estate opened, swallowing another hopeful employee. The winter air outside felt warmer than the atmosphere within these walls. A young woman rushed down the marble steps, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled resignation letter. She was the 12th assistant to leave this month before noon. Julian Hayes paused at the towering entrance. His boots were clean but worn, his navy jacket neatly brushed, though the cuffs betrayed years of quiet endurance and hard work. Inside his pocket, his fingers brushed against a small purple crayon. It was a silent reminder of his daughter, Lily, who had made him promise not to let the estate intimidate him. The foyer smelled of expensive lemon polish and absolute silence. It was the kind of pristine European architecture that looked more like a guarded fortress than a living home. In the grand study, Victoria Sterling sat in a sleek black wheelchair. At 34, her pale blonde hair and sharp features commanded the room with an icy, undeniable authority. She tapped a silver pen against the mahogany desk, her piercing gaze fixed on the doorway. She had built a medical empire, but currently her daily routine consisted of testing human resolve. The house manager introduced Julian. Victoria did not smile. She merely offered a single, sweeping glance that calculated his worth and immediately deemed him completely insufficient for the role. "You will resign before lunch," Victoria stated flatly, her voice devoid of any emotion. It was not a prediction, but a calculated guarantee delivered with surgical precision. Julian did not flinch or look away. He adjusted the strap of his canvas bag, his dark eyes meeting hers with a steady, unbothered calm that she had never encountered. "Tell me what needs doing first," Julian asked. Victoria demanded wild mushroom risotto from a Manhattan restaurant, fresh and not reheated, delivered by noon. The establishment was 30 miles away and did not open until 11:30. Julian simply checked the clock above the fireplace and gave a short nod. She then pushed a heavy leather binder across the desk without warning. "My 9 o'clock board briefing has been moved to 8:40, she announced. That left exactly 18 minutes to coordinate a global conference call. The house manager lingered near the doorway, waiting for the inevitable panic to set in. Instead of shrinking, Julian retrieved a small, frayed notebook from his bag. He moved with the precise, deliberate efficiency of a man who had survived worse. He did not scramble like someone eager to impress wealth. He worked with the practiced speed of a father used to packing lunches before the morning bus. Victoria observed him in total silence. People usually entered her orbit heavily armed with either excessive pity or profound fear. Julian offered neither. The heavy brass pendulum of the antique grandfather clock swung steadily, ruthlessly marking the vanishing minutes before the crucial executive corporate review. With 2 minutes to spare, Julian placed the newly corrected briefing sheet perfectly aligned with the edge of her polished mahogany desk. At exactly 8:39, the massive wall monitor illuminated, instantly displaying neat, bright squares containing the imposing figures of the corporate board members. The digital conference call quickly descended into an interrogation. Executive board members voiced sharp complaints regarding delays in the new medical mobility platform. Victoria responded with merciless precision. She dismantled their arguments with cold facts, her voice remaining perfectly even while asserting absolute control over the room. Standing silently near the mahogany desk, Julian lowered his gaze. A physical medication log had been carelessly left beside the massive glowing monitor. His eyes caught a subtle, troubling discrepancy. The numerical dosage notation listed beside her morning prescription did not align with standard therapeutic recovery protocols. Drawing on his years as a combat medic, Julian recognized the pattern. It was a precise adjustment designed to induce gradual cognitive fatigue and physical weakness. At 9:17, the call abruptly ended. The wall screen faded to black, leaving Victoria leaning back in her wheelchair, visibly pale but undeniably victorious. "Still here, Mr. Hayes?" she asked coldly. Julian did not offer a defensive reply. He simply picked up the medication sheet from the desk. He placed the document directly in front of her and tapped a single line of ink. He quietly explained the chemical implications of that specific dosage. The grand study fell into a heavy, dangerous silence. Victoria stared intensely at the paper, the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock suddenly amplified. For the first time that morning, her icy facade fractured. The chilling realization set in. A calculated betrayal was being orchestrated from within her own walls. Victoria's immediate instinct was defense. With a sharp wave of her hand, she fiercely ordered the house manager to cancel her physical therapy session. Julian stepped forward, his voice low but entirely immovable. He refused to strike the medical appointment from the daily calendar. She glared at him, accustomed to people hastily retreating from her anger. Instead, he simply stated that while she controlled the company, he controlled her schedule. Reluctantly, she allowed him to accompany her down the east corridor. The walls displayed framed magazine covers highlighting her untouchable, powerful past. Approaching the private rehabilitation suite, a sudden, out-of-place flash of bright purple in the adjacent sunroom caught Victoria's sharp attention. Inside, a 7-year-old girl with sunlit brown hair sat at a highly polished table, quietly focused on working with a wax crayon. Victoria's expression hardened instantly. Her voice dropped as she demanded to know why a child was trespassing in her strictly controlled environment. Julian smoothly positioned himself between the wheelchair and the girl. He explained without shame that the sitter had canceled, and rent was due on Friday. The little girl, Lily, silently turned her paper around. It depicted a woman in a black wheelchair wearing a bright, crooked crown. Victoria stared at the crude drawing. The child had not drawn a tragic figure in a medical prison, but a resilient queen commanding her throne. Victoria did not tear the paper. Instead, she folded the drawing once with uncharacteristic care, slipping it safely into the pocket of her dark blazer. They finally entered the private rehabilitation suite. The spacious room smelled faintly of clean cedar mats and heavily expensive, and used medical machinery. The resident physical therapist looked utterly shocked to see Victoria arrive. The CEO had not attended a single recovery session in over 11 weeks. Victoria stared at the imposing steel parallel bars. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the armrests, fear threatening to completely overwhelm her pride. Julian did not hover nervously behind her chair. He remained near the doorway, offering steady presence rather than the suffocating pity she despised. She turned toward him, her voice laced with defensive hostility. She challenged whether he believed a sweet drawing magically fixed her broken reality. Julian quietly shook his head. He retrieved a worn, laminated photograph from his canvas bag, revealing a picture of his late wife during her final illness. He stated plainly that his wife hated being called brave. He told Victoria she wasn't brave. She was grieving her old life, and that was entirely acceptable. That raw, unfiltered truth pierced through her icy defenses. Without another word of protest, Victoria wheeled herself directly toward the center of the parallel bars. With agonizing physical effort, her hands gripping the cold steel, the once untouchable executive lifted her weight and stood up for the first time in months. At 11:45, a sleek black corporate sedan pulled smoothly into the estate's long, circular gravel driveway. Arthur Vance, the chief operating officer of Sterling Health, stepped out. At 42, he wore a flawlessly tailored suit and a perfectly practiced, entirely hollow smile. Inside the grand study, the intensely heavy atmosphere had slightly softened following Victoria's monumental physical breakthrough in the therapy suite. That fragile piece shattered the exact moment Arthur walked confidently into the room, commanding the space as if the title deed were already in his pocket. He expressed immediate, exaggerated concern over the sudden confusion regarding her medical logs, his sharp eyes scanning the room to assess the situation. His calculating gaze quickly landed on Julian. Arthur instantly recognized that this new presence was not just another easily intimidated, temporary employee. Politely suggesting that Victoria required immediate rest, Arthur requested a private moment with Julian. To Arthur's surprise, Victoria silently permitted it. The moment the heavy study doors clicked shut, Arthur's warm corporate polish vanished entirely. He slid a pre-written check for $10,000 across the desk. He framed it smoothly as a generous severance package, a necessary discretion cost for Julian to pack up his daughter and quietly disappear. Julian looked down at the staggering amount of money. With calm, unblinking deliberation, he slowly pushed the check right back across the mahogany surface. Arthur's polished demeanor finally cracked. The realization that a man with worn shoes could not be bought visibly offended the wealthy executive. Snatching the rejected check from the mahogany desk, Arthur's voice dropped its fake warmth, replaced by a cold, deeply hostile edge. He issued a quiet but precise warning, stating that men who mistook proximity to wealth for actual power always ended up professionally ruined. Julian offered no dramatic retort. He simply maintained his unwavering, silent stare, refusing to give the executive the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Without another word, Arthur turned and exited the grand study, his crisp footsteps echoing like a ticking countdown down the marble hallway. The heavy silence returned to the room. Victoria wheeled herself back into the main study space, observing Julian's rigid posture with sharp eyes. Before either could speak, the older house manager rushed into the room. Her usual composed demeanor was entirely replaced by visible panic. She carried a silver digital tablet, her trembling hands placing it directly onto the polished desk between Victoria and the stoic assistant. The glowing screen displayed a breaking financial news segment. A secretly captured photograph showed Julian standing closely beside Victoria's wheelchair during their private argument. The bold, digital headline below the image read, "Unstable medical CEO under dangerous influence of unqualified assistant, twisting their reality into a corporate scandal." Victoria stared at the screen, the vicious corporate terminology hitting her with an immense psychological weight. The media was formally labeling her as incompetent. Julian reached out and swiped the digital screen. A second photograph appeared, zooming heavily into the distant glass windows of the estate's sunroom. Through the blurred pixels, the faint but unmistakable shape of a little girl in a pink sweater could be seen sitting quietly at a table. Julian's unyielding stoicism shattered completely. The terrifying realization that his 7-year-old daughter was now a visible target in a corporate power struggle drained the color from his face. Without a second of hesitation, he announced he was taking his child home. His tone carried the absolute, non-negotiable authority of a protective father. Triggered by this immediate departure, Victoria's deep-seated fear rapidly morphed into a brittle, defensive anger. She laughed bitterly, mocking him for retreating. She coldly accused him of wanting to play the noble caregiver, only to abandon her the exact moment the reality of her world became genuinely difficult. Julian paused near the doorway. He did not raise his voice to match her escalating rage, nor did he offer a defensive explanation regarding his parental duties. Moving with quiet dignity, he unclipped his temporary agency identification badge and placed it meticulously on the desk, directly beside Lily's folded purple drawing. He calmly told Victoria that she wasn't broken, but she was terrified enough to purposefully push away anyone who actually attempted to stay. Julian walked into the sunlit room, his fierce expression instantly softening into gentle reassurance as he looked at his daughter. Sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, Lily did not ask any questions. She quietly gathered her wax crayons into her small backpack. Just before they exited the heavy front doors, the little girl turned back, quickly slipping a fresh piece of paper under the study entrance. Victoria sat perfectly still in the massive, shadowy room, listening to the fading sound of Julian's worn truck disappearing down the estate's long driveway. For a long moment, she simply stared at the cheap plastic agency badge resting perfectly beside the original purple crayon drawing on her mahogany desk. Slowly, she rolled her wheelchair toward the heavy wooden doors, reaching down to pick up the second paper Lily had left behind. The crude new drawing depicted 3 stick figures standing together under a bright yellow sun. A woman in a chair, a tall man, and a little girl. Below the figures, carefully written in purple letters, was a message about people who chose to stay even when they were told to leave. A single, genuine tear finally escaped Victoria's eyes, tracing down her pale cheek as the profound clarity of her own self-sabotage washed over her. But she did not collapse into despair. With a sudden, ironclad resolve, she turned back to her desk and began forcefully gathering her corporate documents for the upcoming board review. The following afternoon, at precisely 2:58, Victoria Sterling sat at the head of the massive glass conference table on the 45th floor of Sterling Health. Hidden safely beneath her resting palm was Lily's folded crayon drawing, acting as a silent, private anchor in a room entirely devoid of mercy. 12 executive directors sat around the polished table. The corporate atmosphere was freezing, reflecting the ruthless winter skyline visible through the panoramic windows. At the far end of the room, Arthur Vance stood confidently. He wore a fresh, immaculate suit and an expression of deeply fabricated sorrow. With a practiced sigh, Arthur initiated the presentation. The digital screen behind him illuminated with the scandalous tabloid headlines from the previous evening. He formally recommended a temporary executive transfer, meticulously citing the altered therapeutic data and her supposed cognitive reliability concerns as definitive proof. The board members nodded in grim agreement, their hushed murmurs focused entirely on protecting their financial investments and maintaining corporate stability. Victoria observed the orchestrated betrayal with chilling composure. She did not argue, letting Arthur confidently construct his own elaborate trap. Feeling completely victorious, Arthur formally called for the final board vote to permanently remove the founder from her executive administrative position. Before a single hand could be fully raised in favor, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom abruptly swung open without warning. Julian Hayes stepped confidently into the freezing corporate atmosphere of the boardroom. He wore the exact same worn navy jacket, completely indifferent to the wealth surrounding him. Directly behind him stood Eleanor Price, the estate's veteran house manager. Her face was pale with anxiety, but her posture remained incredibly resolute. They were followed by an unfamiliar woman in a sharp gray suit, tightly clutching a heavy digital evidence case to her chest. Arthur's triumphant expression instantly hardened into genuine panic. He aggressively demanded that security immediately remove the intruders from the closed executive session. Julian completely ignored the executive's frantic shouting. Instead, his deep eyes locked directly onto Victoria across the massive length of the glass table. In that single, silent exchange of glances, Victoria realized that being truly defended felt entirely different from merely being rescued. Julian calmly informed the board that security could gladly escort him out, but only after they reviewed the raw data recorded by their own internal systems. The independent data analyst stepped forward without waiting for permission, rapidly connecting her encrypted device directly to the central presentation monitor. Arthur lunged forward to terminate the connection, but the senior chairman of the board firmly raised his hand, commanding Arthur to stand down. The massive screen flickered, instantly replacing Arthur's fabricated medical charts with raw, undeniable pharmacy logs, tracing the altered dosage directly to the chief operating officer's private terminal. The entire boardroom plunged into a stunned, breathless silence. The 12 executive directors stared at the undeniable digital trail of corporate sabotage. The data analyst pressed one final key. A clear, high-quality audio recording echoed through the room, capturing Arthur offering Julian a $10,000 bribe. All color rapidly drained from Arthur's flawlessly tailored appearance. The charismatic executive realized the elaborate trap had finally snapped shut on him. In a desperate, bitter final attempt, Arthur mocked Julian, asking if an unqualified assistant really believed he could rescue a medical empire. Julian stood his ground, his voice remarkably steady. He stated he came to support a brilliant woman whom Arthur had tried to erase from her own legacy. The senior chairman removed his glasses, letting out a heavy, disappointed breath before formally suspending Arthur's operational authorities, pending an immediate legal investigation. Arthur turned his gaze toward Victoria, perhaps expecting an outburst of emotional rage or vindictive triumph. Instead, Victoria offered him nothing but an icy, devastating look of absolute clarity. She quietly reminded him that her mind was not broken. It was remarkably precise. When the heavy boardroom doors opened again, It was corporate security arriving to politely but firmly escort the former chief operating officer from the premises. As Arthur was led away in disgrace, the remaining executives sat in heavy, respectful silence, waiting for the rightful CEO to issue her next command. Victoria addressed the remaining board members. She did not demand their hollow apologies. Instead, she demanded a renewed, relentless focus on the patients waiting for their medical technology. The meeting formally adjourned. The executive directors filed out of the glass boardroom quietly, offering deep, respectful nods to the woman they had nearly abandoned. Soon, only Victoria, Julian, and Eleanor Price remained in the vast, quiet space high above the winter city. The frosted glass doors nudged open gently. Little Lily, still wearing her pink sweater and carrying a small backpack, carefully peeked into the massive room. She innocently asked if the scary meeting had finally ended. Victoria let out a long, trembling breath that sounded remarkably like a soft laugh. Lily confidently walked right up to the head of the imposing table. She looked up at Victoria and asked if she was still the boss of everyone. Victoria looked at the child, and then slowly shifted her gaze to Julian. She quietly replied that she had learned being the boss was not the same as being alone. Julian lowered his eyes. In that small, humble movement, Victoria saw a decent man who had simply kept his dignity in a room designed to strip it away. Speaking directly to Julian for the first time since he left the estate, Victoria admitted that she had been cruel to him out of profound fear. Julian met her gaze with a gentle, forgiving nod. He quietly agreed that her fear explained her actions, and that this moment was where their real story would start. Victoria reached into the pocket of her tailored blazer, carefully unfolding the original drawing of the crooked crown. She placed it gently onto the glass table, right next to the second drawing that Lily had slipped under the study doors. Tracing the purple letters with her finger, Victoria looked up at Julian, asking him why he had chosen to return after she had driven him away. Julian replied simply that taking his daughter away from danger was absolutely necessary, but abandoning Victoria entirely was never an option. Without being prompted, little Lily stepped closer, smoothly slipping her small, warm hand directly into Victoria's pale fingers. Victoria stared at the tiny hand for a single, hesitant breath before gently closing her own fingers around it, finally accepting the gesture. Later that evening, Victoria rolled herself out onto the wide corporate terrace. Julian walked peacefully beside her, purposefully choosing not to push her chair. Lily skipped happily ahead of them under the darkening sky, the wax crayons in her pink backpack rattling like tiny, joyful bells. Looking out at the glittering city lights, Victoria admitted she did not know what their dynamic would become. Julian smiled softly, suggesting they didn't need to name it yet. Lily suddenly spun around, enthusiastically asking if whatever they were becoming could include dinner. Victoria let out a beautiful, genuine laugh, the sound carrying the promise of profound healing into the cold winter air. 6 months later, the bitter winter had thawed into a bright, promising spring. Sterling Health prepared for its most significant public event in corporate history. The grand atrium of the headquarters was packed with media professionals and investors, the very same people who had once eagerly anticipated Victoria's downfall. Victoria Sterling took the center stage. She did not attempt to hide her wheelchair. Instead, she commanded the massive room from it with undeniable, effortless grace. The digital screen behind her illuminated, not with scandalous tabloid headlines, but with the pristine, revolutionary schematics of the new robotic mobility platform. Her voice rang out clearly, explaining that the new technology was not solely designed to help patients walk again, but to restore their fundamental human dignity. Standing quietly in the shadowy wings of the stage was Julian. He wore a sharp, understated suit, having seamlessly transitioned from a temporary assistant to an irreplaceable partner. In the very front row of the audience, little Lily sat drawing in a brand-new sketchbook, swinging her legs happily beneath a vibrant purple dress. As Victoria concluded her presentation, the massive atrium erupted into a thunderous, genuine standing ovation, permanently cementing her newly reclaimed legacy. She smoothly rolled herself off the bright stage, moving directly toward the wings where Julian was waiting with a steady, intensely proud smile. Side by side, they exited the chaotic glow of the flashing cameras, entirely ready to face whatever their shared future held, completely unbroken. Exactly 1 week after the triumphant public launch, Sterling Health's corporate stock valuation soared to unprecedented historical highs. Inside the bright, sunlit executive office on the 45th floor, Victoria and Julian reviewed the overwhelming global demand for their new medical platform. Julian was no longer a temporary assistant. As the newly appointed director of operations, he analyzed the manufacturing logistics with his usual calm precision. Their productive morning was abruptly interrupted when the heavy office doors opened to reveal an entirely unscheduled, highly intimidating visitor. Victor Thorne, the notoriously ruthless CEO of a massive European medical conglomerate, stepped into the room with an aura of absolute arrogance. Thorne completely bypassed standard corporate pleasantries. He aggressively dropped a heavy legal acquisition binder directly onto Victoria's pristine desk. He explicitly demanded the exclusive patent rights to their new robotic mobility platform, offering a staggering financial sum in exchange for her immediate surrender. Victoria did not even glance at the printed numbers. She coldly rejected his offer, stating that human recovery was not a corporate commodity available for purchase. Thorne's smile turned chilling. He smoothly revealed that he had already begun secretly purchasing proxy shares from the disgraced Arthur Vance to force an aggressive acquisition. As Thorne confidently exited the office, Julian stared down at the heavy legal binder, immediately recognizing that their hard-won peace was officially over. Julian did not waste a single second. He immediately broke the seal on the heavy legal binder Thorne had left behind on the desk. Scanning the dense corporate clauses, his sharp eyes identified a devastating legal loophole regarding emergency proxy acquisitions and offshore share transfers. Victoria swiftly initiated a secure communication channel, recalling Alicia Monroe, their trusted independent data analyst, back to the executive suite. Within the hour, Alicia was back at the glass boardroom table, her fingers flying with practiced speed across her encrypted digital device. The glowing monitors quickly illuminated a complex web of offshore shell companies, specifically designed to mask the rapid transfer of corporate equity. Julian analyzed the hidden digital timestamps, realizing Thorne had been quietly funding Arthur Vance's legal defense in exchange for his voting shares. Faced with this massive corporate assault, Victoria remained remarkably composed, refusing to revert to the defensive fear that had once paralyzed her. With clinical precision, she delegated the counteroffensive, instructing Julian to trace the financial web while she fortified the remaining board members. Julian quietly observed her commanding presence, a silent but profound acknowledgement of the unbreakable, brilliant executive she had fully become. On the massive digital display, a highlighted calendar date served as a chilling reminder. They had exactly 72 hours before Thorne could legally seize control. The digital clock mercilessly counted down. With 71 hours remaining, the massive corporate counteroffensive commenced under the cover of night. Inside the dimly lit executive office, Victoria systematically contacted the remaining board members. She did not beg for their continued loyalty. Instead, she utilized cold, calculated leverage. She presented the senior chairman with a stark choice between securing his legacy or sinking with an illegal acquisition. The chairman yielded to her flawless logic. Within 3 hours, Victoria had successfully secured the necessary voting majority to block a standard buyout. Meanwhile, Julian and Alicia remained in the glass boardroom. Empty coffee cups littered the table as they methodically dismantled Thorne's digital labyrinth. Alicia's fingers flew across the keyboard, successfully breaching a heavily encrypted firewall masking a European offshore financial ledger. Julian leaned in, his sharp eyes analyzing the raw data. He meticulously traced a massive, illicit capital transfer directly to Arthur Vance's private accounts. The evidence was indisputable. Thorne had utilized illegal corporate funds to orchestrate the proxy buyout, a severe violation of international trade regulations. As pale morning light broke across the city skyline, Julian delivered the printed financial ledger directly to Victoria's desk. Victoria reviewed the document in total silence. A faint, razor-sharp smile appeared on her lips. The ultimate trap was now perfectly set. The 72-hour acquisition window officially closed. Midday sunlight reflected sharply off the towering glass exterior of the Sterling Health headquarters. Victor Thorne marched into the grand boardroom flanked by a meticulously dressed team of corporate attorneys. His posture radiated absolute, undeniable arrogance. Victoria was already seated at the head of the long glass table, flanked by Julian and the loyal board members, waiting in perfect silence. Thorne smoothly slid the final proxy acquisition contract across the polished surface, offering a silver pen for Victoria to formally surrender her company. Victoria completely ignored the silver pen. Instead, she offered Julian a subtle, highly coordinated nod of authorization. Stepping forward, Julian placed a single, unmarked black folder directly on top of Thorne's meticulously drafted acquisition contract. Thorne opened the folder with a dismissive smirk, fully expecting a desperate financial counteroffer. His expression instantly froze as he recognized the illicit offshore ledgers. Victoria coldly informed the European executive that international trade regulators had already received the exact same encrypted documentation exactly 10 minutes prior. Recognizing the catastrophic legal implications of the illegal capital transfer, Thorne's elite corporate attorneys immediately stepped back, physically distancing themselves from their ruined client. Thorne stood completely paralyzed in the silent boardroom. His sprawling, ruthless medical conglomerate was rapidly collapsing around him, entirely dismantled by his own immense greed. Within 15 minutes, federal financial regulators arrived at the 45th floor, formally detaining Victor Thorne for severe corporate fraud. As the disgraced executive was escorted into the glass elevator, the immediate threat to Sterling Health's legacy was permanently neutralized. The grand boardroom slowly emptied, leaving Victoria and Julian alone in the quiet aftermath of their monumental corporate victory. Victoria rested her hand on the black evidence folder, exhaling a long, steady breath as the reality of their absolute triumph finally settled in. 1 month later, the imposing Sterling estate in the Hamptons had completely transformed. The harsh, isolating winter had yielded to a lush, vibrant summer. On the expansive green lawn, little Lily ran freely under the warm sun, her joyful laughter echoing across the perfectly manicured grounds. Victoria sat comfortably on the stone terrace, dressed in a soft, elegant summer dress. Her previously icy corporate persona had entirely melted away. Julian stepped out onto the terrace carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He leaned casually against the stone balustrade beside her wheelchair. Without any hesitation, he gently rested his hand over hers. The quiet intimacy between them was completely natural and deeply grounded in mutual respect. Watching the little girl play in the sun, Victoria realized that while she had successfully saved a billion-dollar empire, she had ultimately gained a family. Deep within the sterile, high-tech research and development laboratories of Sterling Health, the culmination of their work finally stood ready. The revolutionary robotic mobility exoskeleton gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights, a masterpiece of modern medical engineering. The lead biomedical engineer explained that the prototype required an incredibly grueling, painful physical integration process to calibrate to a human nervous system. When the engineering team nervously asked who would volunteer as the primary clinical test subject, the room fell into a hesitant silence. Breaking the quiet, Victoria firmly announced that she would personally undergo the trials, refusing to ask anyone else to take a risk she would not. Julian stood by her side, his expression reflecting immense pride, though he intimately understood the agonizing physical toll this decision would demand. By that evening, the private rehabilitation suite at the estate had been completely overhauled, preparing for the most intense physical therapy of Victoria's life. Julian gently assisted her onto the exercise mat. The dynamic between them shifted once again, grounded entirely in raw, physical endurance. The preliminary exercises were excruciating. Every movement forced Victoria to confront the profound muscular atrophy that had plagued her for months. Despite the overwhelming pain, she refused to stop. Her fierce determination was no longer fueled by corporate survival, but by the profound desire to walk beside her new family. The following 3 weeks became a relentless cycle of physical exhaustion. Victoria spent hours gripping the heavy steel parallel bars, pushing her body to the brink. During one particularly grueling afternoon, her trembling arms finally gave out. She collapsed heavily onto the safety mat, utterly defeated by her own physical limitations. Frustration completely overwhelmed her. She struck the floor with her palm, her voice breaking as she bitterly declared that her body was simply too unresponsive to continue. Julian did not offer hollow, optimistic comforts. He simply sat down beside her on the mat, his quiet, steady presence serving as a grounding anchor in her storm. The heavy doors opened softly. Little Lily walked into the rehabilitation suite, carefully holding a small glass of water with both hands. The child sat quietly next to Victoria. With absolute innocence, Lily whispered that even the strongest queens needed to rest their royal muscles sometimes. Victoria looked into the little girl's bright eyes. The bitter storm of self-pity dissolved entirely, replaced by a profound, unshakable maternal resolve. Over the next 2 weeks, the agonizing struggles slowly transformed into visible progress. Victoria's posture grew significantly stronger, her stamina doubling under Julian's watchful care. The grueling preparation phase officially concluded on a crisp Tuesday morning when a sterile, white transport van pulled up to the estate's private entrance. The lead engineers carefully wheeled the gleaming robotic mobility exoskeleton directly into her suite. The monumental moment for the first physical calibration had finally arrived. The clinical fitting process was intensely meticulous. The engineering team carefully secured the heavy carbon fiber exoskeleton brackets around Victoria's legs and lower spine. Advanced biometric sensors were directly applied to her skin, instantly illuminating with a soft blue glow as they successfully connected to her nervous system. The lead biomedical engineer formally initialized the central power core. A low, powerful mechanical hum resonated throughout the quiet rehabilitation suite. Victoria gripped the steel parallel bars tightly. Despite her immense bravery, the terrifying vulnerability of trusting a machine to hold her entire weight was evident. Julian positioned himself directly at the opposite end of the bars. He did not speak. His steady, unwavering gaze provided all the necessary assurance she required. Reviewing the stabilized digital readouts, the engineer gave the final authorization to engage the primary mobility servos. With a synchronized mechanical whir, the robotic joints firmly locked into position. The powerful suit smoothly elevated Victoria, lifting her into a perfectly upright, standing posture. The profound physical sensation of standing tall without agonizing muscular strain completely overwhelmed her. She stared down in awe at the revolutionary technology encasing her limbs. Julian slowly extended his hand toward her. Victoria took a deep, stabilizing breath, concentrating intensely to initiate the neural command for forward movement. The sleek mechanical foot lifted and struck the foam mat with a heavy, secure thud. A massive, silent wave of triumph flooded the room as she successfully took her first assisted step. Following that monumental first step, Victoria's physical progress accelerated rapidly. She spent her mornings practicing walking down the long, sunlit corridors of the grand estate. Julian walked patiently beside her during every session. He kept his hands comfortably in his pockets, purposefully allowing her to develop complete physical independence. Little Lily frequently skipped ahead of them, turning back to offer bright, encouraging smiles. The rhythmic whir of the robotic servos became a comforting heartbeat within the home. As several months passed, the biomedical engineering team successfully finalized the commercial design of the exoskeleton, rendering the technology sleeker, quieter, and highly intuitive. To commemorate this groundbreaking medical achievement, the corporate board organized a massive, highly anticipated international gala to unveil the technology to the world. Inside her executive office, Victoria meticulously reviewed the gala's grand seating chart. Julian approached her desk, quietly asking how she preferred to enter the ballroom. Victoria glanced at her black wheelchair, then at the sleek exoskeleton mounted nearby. She stated with absolute authority that she would not be rolling into the venue. Julian smiled warmly, profoundly admiring her unshakable courage. With a slight, respectful bow, he formally offered to personally escort her down the grand staircase. The highly anticipated evening finally arrived. The Grand Manhattan Ballroom was spectacularly decorated, filled with thousands of elite corporate executives and leading medical professionals. Hidden quietly backstage, Victoria stood incredibly tall in a breathtaking evening gown. The advanced mechanical joints of the suit were perfectly concealed beneath the elegant fabric, ready to shock the world. The master of ceremonies approached the crystal podium, his voice echoing across the packed ballroom as he formally introduced the visionary founder of Sterling Health. A profound hush fell over the thousands of attendees as the heavy velvet curtains at the top of the grand marble staircase began to slowly part. The elite audience, fully expecting to witness a familiar black wheelchair emerge from the shadows, collectively gasped in sheer disbelief. Victoria stood majestically at the very top of the stairs. Bathed in a brilliant white spotlight, she looked incredibly powerful, elegant, and perfectly upright. Julian stood sharply beside her in a classic tuxedo. With a gentle, protective smile, he subtly offered his arm to provide her with a balancing anchor. She rested her hand lightly on his sleeve, but her posture remained entirely independent, her spine held perfectly straight by the hidden exoskeleton. Taking a deep breath, Victoria initiated the first descending step. The advanced servos hummed virtually silently beneath the flowing silk of her evening gown. As she flawlessly navigated the marble steps, the massive ballroom absolutely erupted into deafening, thunderous applause and a blinding storm of camera flashes. Her graceful descent was a visual masterpiece of sheer human resilience and groundbreaking medical innovation, instantly redefining the future of her company. Upon reaching the main ballroom floor, Victoria confidently released Julian's arm, stepping forward toward the podium entirely on her own to address the awestruck world. Victoria gracefully reached the crystal podium. She rested her hands lightly on its polished edges, looking out over the immense sea of captivated faces. The massive ballroom fell into an absolute, reverent silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, projecting calm authority across the elegant space. She eloquently declared that the robotic mobility platform was not merely a corporate product, but a definitive promise that profound loss did not mean the end of life. Watching from the shadowy edge of the stage, Julian observed her with quiet awe, reflecting on the remarkable transformation from the bitter executive he had first met. Concluding her historic address, Victoria dedicated the groundbreaking technology to those who bravely chose to stay when walking away would have been much easier. The elite audience immediately rose to their feet for a second thunderous standing ovation, thoroughly moved by the raw authenticity of her message. As the formal presentation concluded, the gala smoothly transitioned into a lavish reception. Elegantly dressed attendees mingled under the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. After gracefully accepting congratulations from numerous international investors, Victoria politely excused herself from the center of the bustling crowd. Navigating the ballroom with fluid, mechanically assisted grace, she found Julian standing quietly near a towering window that overlooked the glittering city. Julian handed her a crystal glass of sparkling water. Without needing words, they gently clinked their glasses together in a profound, private celebration of their shared triumph. Several weeks after the historic Manhattan Gala, the grand Sterling estate completely shed its corporate austerity, embracing a warm, domestic tranquility. In the sunlit kitchen, Victoria stood comfortably at the marble counter. Wearing a refined, everyday version of the exoskeleton, she casually poured fresh coffee. Julian strolled into the room wearing a soft morning sweater. Stepping up behind her, he gently wrapped his arms around her waist in a deeply loving embrace. Victoria leaned back into his solid presence with a radiant smile. The impenetrable, icy corporate armor she once wore had entirely melted away. Eleanor Price, the veteran house manager, entered the kitchen carrying a vibrant bouquet of fresh summer flowers, offering the couple a genuinely warm, knowing smile. The entire household was bustling with joyful preparation. Today marked little Lily's 8th birthday, and the grand dining room was already adorned with colorful streamers. Footsteps echoed rapidly from the hallway. Lily bounded down the grand staircase, proudly wearing a colorful paper birthday crown on her head. Julian immediately caught his daughter, sweeping her up into a high, dizzying spin as her joyful laughter echoed throughout the massive home. Victoria watched the beautiful scene unfold with profound serenity. Moving smoothly and independently, she walked across the room to join them. The three of them came together in a tight, immensely warm family embrace. The fractured pieces of their individual pasts had finally formed a perfect, unbreakable whole. The success of the robotic exoskeleton rapidly transformed Sterling Health from a massive corporate entity into a beacon of global medical philanthropy. 3 months later, Victoria and Julian officially inaugurated the Lily Hayes Pediatric Rehabilitation Center, completely funded by their personal equity. Inside the bright, colorful new facility, physical therapists worked patiently with young patients using scaled-down, pediatric versions of the robotic suit. Victoria walked smoothly through the lively clinic, her own refined exoskeleton serving as a living, breathing testament to the technology's miraculous potential. She approached a young, wheelchair-bound girl who was looking fearfully at the parallel bars, recognizing the exact same terror she had once harbored. Kneeling down to eye level, Victoria gently took the frightened child's hand, softly explaining that the metal suit was not a cage, but a set of wings. Julian watched from the doorway, his heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of pride as he witnessed Victoria's profound empathy in action. Encouraged by the CEO's personal assurance, the young girl bravely allowed the medical team to secure the robotic braces to her small legs. As the child successfully took her first assisted, trembling step, the entire pediatric ward erupted into spontaneous, joyful applause. Victoria looked back at Julian, her brilliant blue eyes communicating a silent, powerful truth. True power was never about control, but about lifting others up. Over the next year, the robotic mobility platform garnered unprecedented global acclaim, earning a nomination for the most prestigious medical innovation award in Geneva. Late one evening, inside the quiet executive suite, Victoria and Julian tirelessly reviewed the final presentation schematics for the European Medical Summit. To verify a specific biomechanical metric, Victoria engaged her exoskeleton, standing up from her desk to perform a routine calibration sequence. Suddenly, a minor calibration error caused the primary knee servo to misfire, resulting in a sudden, unexpected loss of structural balance. As the heavy suit faltered, Victoria began to fall toward the polished hardwood floor, entirely unable to correct her mechanical posture. Moving with immediate, practiced precision, Julian caught her securely in his arms before she could suffer any physical impact. They remained frozen in the quiet office. In the past, this mechanical failure would have triggered a severe storm of bitter frustration. Instead, looking up into Julian's deeply worried eyes, Victoria broke the silence with a bright, beautiful, and completely carefree laugh. Realizing she was perfectly fine, Julian smiled warmly. He gently helped her steady herself, refusing to let her go. In that quiet, intimate moonlight, he reached into his jacket pocket, slowly revealing a small velvet box that held a brilliant diamond ring. Victoria looked at the sparkling ring, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She did not hesitate for a single second. With a gentle, affirming nod, she accepted his silent proposal. Julian carefully slid the brilliant diamond ring onto her pale, elegant finger. The quiet office faded away as they shared a profound, intimate embrace, officially sealing their unbreakable partnership under the soft moonlight. 1 year later, the sprawling summer gardens of the Sterling estate were beautifully decorated for a deeply private, intimate wedding ceremony. Little Lily, wearing a beautiful white dress and a floral crown, happily scattered vibrant rose petals down the grassy aisle. Victoria emerged from the grand estate doors, wearing a breathtaking lace wedding gown. She walked entirely independently using her refined exoskeleton. Her movement was a flawless testament to human resilience. She walked down the aisle not as a survivor, but as a victorious, radiant queen. Julian waited patiently at the altar. As he took her hand, the fractured pieces of their individual pasts were permanently laid to rest. Their journey proved that true strength was never about surviving isolation, but finding the profound courage to let someone else stay. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder. Sometimes, they arrive wearing worn shoes, carrying a purple crayon, and refusing to ever leave.